Welcome to this community newspaper's Facebook program, Excellence in Education. This is Marta Perez, and our mission is to expose and inspire excellence in education. Please follow us on Facebook and send questions via our chat room. We are so honored and pleased to have a very accomplished woman whose life has been marked by books and the business of books. And she is our guest today. Miss Raquel Roque is a businesswoman and writer. She comes from a tri generational family of booksellers. She grew up in the business, including the Downtown Book Center, one of the premier wholesalers and distributors of Spanish language books in the entire United States. Further, she works as a bookseller consultant and is a major collaborator with South Florida's famous Books and Books. She herself has written several books which reveal her gastronomic passion. She is a role model to us all and has led a very interesting life thus far. A lot to go. So please welcome Miss Raquel Roque.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you so much.
Tell us, Raquel, about yourself and your background and how you came to this position in life.
Well, I think that the major thing is that I define myself as a bookseller and definitely as an American bookseller. As you said, I come from a tri-generational family of bookselling. My dad had a bookstore in Cuba. And when we left Cuba in 1965 and we got here to Miami, we had whatever resources we had. He bought a little bookshop in downtown Miami that was a part-time right next to the bus station. So I grew up since I was 11 in the bookstore.
How big was the bookstore that he was able to
It was
purchase?
500 square feet. It was right on the bus stop on right next to Royal Castle in 1965.
And was it in
downtown Miami.
Spanish and English?
No, it was a completely English bookstore that served, paperbacks to the people that were taking the buses at that time.
Uh-huh.
And from there is when our community changed. New languages.
And how old were you around at that time?
I was 11. So I started
11.
working in the bookstore right after school when I went to Shadow Lawn Elementary School.
What would you do?
We would take the bus and go downtown, and my brother and I would work in the bookstore and help the family. That's what we all did. That's what it is, and that's what I've tried to really instill in my own children, who also worked in the business, as well as my colleague and my friend Mitchell Kaplan at Books and Books has had his children working.
So
in the
you were,
bookstore.
your parents were booksellers in Cuba.
My mom was a teacher in Cuba. She taught in a school called Havana Business Academy.
Oh.
She taught English.
Okay.
So the one thing that we had that was really cool was the fact that both my parents spoke English when they got to this country, and I think that helped a lot in the immigration process. It also helped us to really not only assimilate but being able to contribute to our community.
So did you speak English when you arrived at 11?
No, but when you're 11 you get to school, I picked it up basically in the summertime.
In the summer.
And my brother, who was a little bit older, took a little bit longer, but in 4 or 5 months.
In those days, it was so easy to just immerse a child. Now the problem is that, there's so many students that also don't speak English, that then they get away with speaking Spanish, for example.
That's right.
And so they don't have to speak English. In those days, you had to, or you couldn't communicate. And for children, communication and socializing is so important, because I started school when I was 6. And I have to tell you, I think it was a month before I was able to speak English. And now, we have students that don't, it takes a longer, but in those days it was rather easy.
And we kind of need to change that narrative a little bit, in the sense that the kids, when they learn English and they're in school and they're speaking English, they should also go home and
It does not happen.
It doesn't happen, but it
Their
could.
mom and grandma are watching the novelas and the Spanish stations, and so they get into that habit too. I mean, I see it all the time.
It's wonderful to be bilingual,
Oh, it's great.
and it's even better to be trilingual or just to dabble in different languages that are
Well,
here in this community.
and in my opinion, I know obviously it's so important to be bilingual, and I know I'm going to ask you about knowing more than one language. But what I find is that it's important, number one, above all, in the United States, to speak good English and to write in English. That I think our students could do much better. Our Hispanic students, in particular, sometimes you see their vocabulary is limited because they're used to speaking Spanish. So when they go outside of Miami, they are a little bit not as advanced in the language as I would prefer. I don't
You
know if
need to be biliterate as well, and I think
biliterate.
that that's happening. That a lot of our bilinguals are not necessarily biliterate, and that's one of the things that, and it's so important even for citizenship, which is one of my new projects. I did a citizenship book a
Okay.
very long, some time ago. Actually, it was for the 2008 citizenship exam, and I've been
Uh,
asked now to review it, to renew it, because the one thing that I really worked very hard on this book was
mm,
to make sure that the English, because unless you're over 65, if you're taking the citizenship exam, it has to be in English. And I think that's where people get
mm.
scared, and that's the real impediment to becoming a fully involved and an activist citizen. So that's my new journey, is
And
to
it's in
review.
Spanish. Are all of
Well,
your
it's
books?
actually, this book is for American citizenship, and it all the questions, which it has a
Yeah.
CD. Later on, it's going to have to be an app
Oh,
now,
good. Okay.
where we say the question in English,
Uh huh.
we translate it in Spanish, but we answer it in
In
English as
English.
well. And if you're following the book, which is
Oh,
really the cool
great.
thing,
Very
I do
nice.
a phonetic translation, as you'll see,
Uh huh.
that if you speak Spanish and you're just phonetically going through, you actually can speak the language.
Right.
The thing is to be able to converse and to understand English, and that's what the citizenship questions are all
But
about.
I find, and I get a little mad about this because I find, for example, when I'm in a group with people that speak English, that only speak English, and I'm like with some of my relatives, they still speak Spanish and they could make an effort and speak English. And I think it's rude, and I wish that they would make more of an effort. But it's just so comfortable. It's so
And
comfortable in Miami to speak
it's
Spanish.
so different
Uh,
in Miami.
and I've even heard people say, which I think is very rude, learn Spanish. You're in Miami, and yes, now that's, I think, very disrespectful because we are in the United States of America. This is an English speaking country, and business, the language of it's such a small minded thing. The language of business is English. The major books are in English. So yes, it's comfortable and it's great to speak two languages, but I believe English has to be number one.
It definitely is, and that is exactly why the reason of this is because I have found throughout all these years that the impediment to everybody, and this is when you take Uber and you talk to the Uber drivers, it's English. It's actually the fact that they are impeded by not
I don't
speaking.
find that, Raquel. I find that Uber, I happen to sometimes take Uber with people that don't speak Spanish, and they don't know how to communicate because most of the drivers, I think, are Hispanic,
Correct.
and they don't speak. They cannot communicate. That is a problem, I
Well,
think,
that
in
is a
my.
problem, and that is the problem that I think that we need to get over. This is something that is very in Miami. You don't find it in LA, which is very
Exactly.
interesting.
No.
You
Or
find in LA that you go to a restaurant, and because I'm Hispanic and I talk in Spanish so much, I might talk to them in Spanish, and they usually answer in English,
yeah.
and then they will answer in Spanish.
Yes.
So English is the major language of this country. This is the way this is the way to become a responsible immigrant and a responsible citizen.
Mhm.
And I think this is the first step. So I
Yes.
have that in my mission, that everybody needs to converse, to be able to get along in English, whether you're in Miami, whether you're in Hialeah, whether you're in
Uh-huh.
Westchester. English is the language, and it's actually an impediment to people that are trying to get ahead.
When you say I have that as part of my mission, how do you mean? What how is your major mission in this? Because you are a very adamant contributing member of our society. How do you mean that?
I think I feel so proud that I am a bookseller, um, that I am an American bookseller. Once again, when we got to this country and, we bought the bookstore, my dad bought the bookstore, all our family vacations were geared about where the American Booksellers Association meeting was that year. So we would say, he would save the money in order for the entire family to go. And that was our vacation. So it's always been a social responsibility for me. Besides the fact that I just love being a bookseller and that's all I've ever done.
What's your favorite book, Raquel?
I love The Little Prince, but my
Ah.
favorite book, and it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by
Oh,
Dale Carnegie.
yeah.
Because I feel like this was written in the 30s, and you read it today, and I
It's
mean,
still
how to
prevalent.
influencer. That's all we talk about now.
Uh-huh.
And how to win friends. Well, how many Facebook friends do you have? It has become, to me, it's like almost like a Bible of really being social and being an activist. And all the people that I surround myself with are people that I find are even more active than I am. So it's kind of neat. I just feel it's my responsibility to be a bookseller. And that's part of how I feel like I can bring on education to
So,
other people.
so tell us a little bit about your business, the Downtown Bookseller Center. Was that what your father
Yeah,
first
that's
established?
exactly what the little bookstore was called in 1965. And what happened was, as
Did it grow? Did it
yes,
grow?
it grew because as I was going to school, I had a dream of owning a bookstore hotel. So I went to
Uh-huh.
Miami-Dade Community College, and then I went on to Florida International University to hospitality management school. So I learned all the ins and outs of
Oh,
hotels
that's
and,
it.
and marketing and restaurant business.
Thus, all these
And
cookbooks.
that's my credentials for the cookbooks has been actually my education in
Are you a
hospitality
great cook?
management. I am I'm not a good cook. I am a very torpe, a very clumsy type of
Clumsy.
cook,
Is
but
your kitchen fully functioning?
it is fully
I'm a
functioning.
terrible cook, and my sister used to say, your kitchen is not fully functioning.
But the cookbook idea came from a long time ago. I don't know if you remember in Cuba, there was a TV chef. She was like the Julia Child of Cuba, Nitza Villapol.
Right.
Well, everybody had
I
a
had a
Nitza
blue. It
Villapol,
had a
the
blue
blue one,
cover
Cocina al Minuto.
because I sure
That's what you
everyone.
gave the
Yep.
brides. That's what you
Mhm.
gave young girls as they started. When in this country, Nitza stayed in Cuba.
But it was a very basic book. It was a
Very
great
basic
book
book.
when I was a young woman because it wasn't with a flourish. I mean, it had like black beans. This is how you do
That's
it.
it.
It's a
But
great
it was
book.
the basic book,
Yeah.
and finding in the bookstore downtown that everybody would come in and say, "Do you have Nita Villapol's book? Do you have
Really.
Nita Villapol's book?" So that's how my interest came about. First, I started kind of translating her recipes.
So she stayed in
Oh yeah,
Cuba.
she stayed in Cuba, and she actually at that time she stayed on TV, and she was the one that would know the food rationings and then build her recipes
On
around
the
the new food rationings, which takes us to the evolution of Cuban cooking and what's happened to Cuban cooking. So it's super
tell us
interesting.
what has happened because I think tell us what has happened
Well, a
to
lot of it,
all of those Cuban recipes that originally came from Spain. There were a lot of olives and seasonings and things, and they ceased to exist in
well,
Cuba. So what
inside
happened?
the island, they kind of evolved. The recipes evolved in whatever they had at the time. And she would get on TV and say, instead of ham croquettes, because there was no ham for the croquettes, or there was no cream for the bechamel sauce in croquettes, she would say, there's a new ration of merluza, the fish that came in from Spain,
So
or heavens forbid, the meat that came
from
later on
China.
from China and from Russia.
Ah,
It's really interesting to know that there's a whole generation that's here now that has nostalgia for Russian food, because
really?
during the 90s, that's what they grew up in Cuba, and that's what they saw.
What
So
what
the evolution
kinds
is super
what
interesting.
kinds of Russian
It's
foods?
kind of like spam, that's
That
the
kind of
yes. And
but
you'll see in the Nitsaviapol recipes where instead of saying, to a pound of ground beef, it's a can of carne rusa.
it's
Very
very
interesting.
interesting. Yes, it's very interesting. I think for us, for Cubans, because it is something that we've seen. Like I know I have relatives that grew up in in Cuba, and I grew up here, and I see the differences in so many
That's right.
areas and mindset growing up in a communist regime versus a capitalist regime. It's very interesting.
And we have fusions here as well, because Cuban cooking has evolved in Miami, not only in Miami, but in the United States.
So how right?
There's many fusions. For example, there's
Yeah.
the new, I call it the new generation at Islas Canarias, which was a very traditional,
Uh-huh.
Spanish and Cuban restaurant. The new generation, which is their super young brother and sister, she is very influenced by Korean food, because when she traveled,
Uh-huh. I
she
love
found
Korean.
Korean food
Is
to
that
be
right?
so she has fused in many of her recipes Korean.
In Isla Canarias,
Yes,
really?
yes, and she's put it in her new place called Finca, which
Uh-huh.
is already,
Yes,
and
yes.
so on and so forth.
Well, and also like for example, you go to Sergio's and you have this skinny diet,
The
skinny
skinny.
girl diet Cuban food, and that again is a fusion, right?
So along another one of my little projects, because I'm one of those that has a million projects, and if one of them gets done, it gets done, is putting healthy elements in our Cuban diet,
Yes,
because we
yes.
have certain health problems that are very, and it's not only Cuban, it's also cocina latina, it's
Hispanic.
Latin.
Yeah.
We have a high rate of obesity, of
Uh-huh.
diabetes,
The
and
country with the highest rate of obesity in the world used to be the United States, and now it's Mexico, unfortunately. And we can see obviously that I guess it's junk. It's a lot of the junk food that is being consumed, but also, for example, in Cuba, where it was a rural community where people worked in the fields all day, they needed the calories.
correct.
Now, when you're
But
working
they
in an
burn the
office,
calories, right?
you don't need to have, you know, rice and beans that has some of the elements, but also, unfortunately, we eat out a lot, and the portions
Yes, they're
are
huge.
so large.
They're
And
huge.
for example, in the Cuban restaurants, I find the portions sometimes three people could eat out of this.
And sometimes it's a matter of substitution. I mean, rice, which is our staple thing, is not necessarily it's a starch that we do not necessarily burn easily. So it should be replaced at certain times. So that's why, there's brown rice, or there's cauliflower rice, or,
That's not
that
this
kind
is
of
not
thing.
a good,
Well,
not as
I
good.
just got a recipe, a wonderful recipe for tofu picadillo.
Oh,
Imagine that.
I like that.
So, all these things
I
are
That's
possible,
wonderful.
and
Yeah.
things are
So you're
evolving.
you're going to be writing a book on this?
I already kind of have one.
I
What I'm
have
trying to
one.
do now is doing like a proposal outline to sell it, because in the
Yeah.
business, you can self-publish your books and you can do a lot of stuff, but you also, if you want to get it out there in the mainstream,
Uh-huh.
and you want to get it out there throughout the United States, you kind of have to do a little.
Tell us a little bit about the books. You are the consummate bookseller. There obviously people are not buying books the way they used to. School districts are not buying books the way we used to. How, and a lot of people have interesting stories. I want to get their story. what do you suggest if a person wants to write a book about their life or about one of their interests? What would you suggest?
Well, the one great thing to begin with is if that's your mission, that's what you want to do,
Have
you
a big
have
mission statement.
you have to do it. First, you do it personally. You do it for yourself. You do it in a small way. You do it for your friends. You do it for your community. Hopefully, your community is open, and there's bookstores like, for example, Books and Books, where we welcome all local authors, and we try
You are
to
great. You are
we
so wonderful,
well,
honestly.
because listen,
What
it
a,
takes a lot to write a book.
oh yeah.
It takes a lot of personal involvement,
Yeah.
and every time somebody comes in and says, I wrote a book, and you have to think how important that
That
is
is
in a
to
person's
them.
life.
Yeah.
It's something that you think about every day.
Right.
So first you have to encourage for them to do it on their own, but then you also have to say, listen, if you want this is writing a book is never a way of making a living. It's kind of
No.
hard. In the book business, it's very hard to make a living. And I'm always reminding everybody, whether it's an author, whether it's a kid starting out in the bookstore shelving books, you got to make a living at it. You have to find a way to make a living at it.
There's
So
very few authors that get the big contracts, and that's a rarity. It's like making it as a movie star.
that's right. That's right. And there's many platforms to your content. Content is everything. Content, it's your intellectual property. It's what's here that you put on paper, or you put by voice, or you spread it out somehow. It's your story. You always have, everybody's got a story to tell.
Everybody's got a
And
story.
it's so beautiful to hear people's story.
Yeah.
And I always ask people, so what's your story? And the stories that come out are amazing. They're also very important to be told. I find that book, since it is the most primitive form of communication, when you come to think about it, it's going to be here to stay. I'm not saying that it's going to lessen or not lessen. It's going to be in another, but
Books are going to become shorter.
they're going to become shorter, but they're also going to be, it is such a primitive form of communication that writing your stuff on paper, regardless, is going to stay around forever. And it might, at least until I can see from up above. And my mission is always to keep the bookstore alive, because no matter what, the community happens when you
And
have people face to face.
and honestly, Books and Books is just so one. It's so nice to go over there,
Because it's the
even if you're just
experience.
gonna have
It's
a
so much
coffee,
fun.
and you have a coffee, and then you go inside and you look through the books,
And you got to have fun.
and
There
it's
is
so much
nothing like
fun.
having fun when
It's
you are learning. Because
learning,
at the
yeah,
end, you're
right,
always learning.
yes.
When you read, you're always learning. And that is the excellence and the beauty of education.
Well, even now, um, we Google everything. And isn't Google wonderful that we can, I want to know how old so and so is, and you look it up. But we have to read it, and that somebody wrote that. So we're still in the process of reading and writing and
Whether
writing
you
things
read
down.
cereal boxes, or
Right.
you're reading the paper, or you're reading the ads as you're driving through, that's what you're doing. And the other thing, the most simple thing, it's an exercise. You got to exercise your brain and your mind the same way you exercise your body.
Yes.
So
Yes, and if you want to be a good writer, you've got to be a good reader, because reading amplifies all of your
that's right.
faculties to
And
to
listen,
write.
millennials read. Millennials read more than you would ever
So
think.
so what are the books? Tell us what's in now. What are the books that are in?
Well, the pandemic brought about two very interesting things, two very interesting trends. One was poetry, which I find, oh my God, poetry never sold. Poetry was something that, you spoke about, but, you never knew. Even as a bookseller, I was always afraid of poetry because it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm selling. But after the pandemic, I don't know if, or during the pandemic, I don't know if people found that it was a way of allaying their fears, their emotions, becoming less lonely.
Uh-huh.
But poetry took a huge, jump. Everybody wanted poetry, nature books also. But then the other very interesting trend is true crime. And don't ask me why.
True crime. Well, because
So
it
it's a
keeps your
variation.
mind in it.
Well, it's a
And
real
it's very,
escape thing.
and all, yeah, absolutely. And very entertaining, and who done it and things like that are
But
so.
those are the two trends that I have seen in the past 2 years. And listen, I'm at the bookstore all day long. I love being with people
And
that are
what is
getting
in
books.
what is in for students? What is in that you see the trends in children's books?
Children's books, we're going back a lot to the basics, but we're also, it's very interesting that we're reading a lot of reference, a lot of biographies. Kids are looking up to a lot of, learning a lot about history.
History.
There's a great new series done by somebody that's actually local, Brad Meltzer. He has a series called I Am Rosa Parks. I am, and with beautiful illustrations, and it just gets kids very interested in icons and in heroes and in lesser known individuals that have made such a difference. It also teaches kids that you can be different but be part of the crowd and be part
We
of
are
civilization.
almost out of time,
Oh
and
my
I wanted to
goodness.
you bring up beautifully illustrated how illustration has changed in books. I know that if you have I know very little about creating books, but I do know a little. And you know, in the old days, the illustrators you'd find, but now they're all over
All
the
over.
world, and you can just click online. Some illustrators are $5 an hour. They have they show you all the things that they were able to do. It's amazing.
The coolest thing I see is the new generation doing, I want to call it comic book illustrations,
Yes.
but the mangas and the
Uh-huh.
comic books and the graphic novels, they are super exciting
And
and
is
they
that a
tell a
trend
story.
that comes from Asia, or is this an American
It
trend?
it it came from Asia, but it actually arose kind of like in the movies from comic books.
Yeah.
I mean, comic books were my first introduction
We have
into
one
books.
minute left. What? Who is your hero?
My dad was my hero
Because
because he's my dad. He was a bookseller and he worked all his life.
okay, I'm writing a book about fathers. Actually, believe it or not, for children, for children. And why are you so successful at your job?
I don't know that I am. I think I am successful at my job because I surround myself with smarter people and people that know more than I do, and I learn and learn, and because I'm curious.
And these are rapid fires. Uh, you have faced many challenges in your life. What has been the largest challenge in your life or your career?
Closing up a little cafe that I had inside of the city of North Miami
Oh,
Public Library.
oh.
It
That must have been very
was sad, but it had to be done.
and your favorite meal?
Arroz con pollo,
There you go.
chicken and rice.
After writing all these books, chicken and rice. I bet it's good, but it's not easy to make.
No.
I've never been able to make a good chicken and rice. Anyway, thank you so
Thank you, Marta.
much, Raquel. It has been such a pleasure. Time flew as always. You are wonderful. Come back again, and I have a page full of questions for you. And thank you very much. And
Thanks.
thank you all for joining us in this program, Excellence in Education.